Welcome to take 5, because Mr. Ravidi has continually made mistakes. But here we are. We make mistakes, we move on. Write an equation that represents the relationship between h and e. Explain how you know the equation is always true. First off, what's an equation? I bet a bunch of you are going to be like, oh, I don't know, is an equation an answer? No, no. An equation is something with an equals sign. That is where the word equation comes from. So 2 plus 2 is not an equation, but 2 plus 2 equals 4 is an equation. An equation is something equals something else. And in this case, my equation, as you can see, I already have my answer here, is h plus e equals 180. Where does that come from? Well, look at angle h and look at angle e. Those two angles are not equal to each other, so I wouldn't just write h equals e, because they're not the same thing, right? This slash in here means not equal to. H is not equal to e. They're not the same thing because one's obtuse, one is obtuse, and the other is acute. So if they're not the same, if they're not congruent, then in these two parallel lines of the transversal, they've got to be supplementary. They've got to be supplementary. So if they're supplementary, we can write that then as, what does that mean? That's h plus e. When you add them up, supplementary means to add up to what? 180 degrees. So h plus e equals 180, and that's where my answer comes from here. And I know they're supplementary because they are, and then I have to think about what kind of angles they are. These are on opposite, they're on the same side of the transversal. See, they're both on the bottom here. They're on the same side of this transversal, and they are outside. So these are same side exterior. SSE, short for same side exterior. They're supplementary because they are same side exterior angles. And that's how you know. So your equation is this whole thing, h plus e equals 180. That would be their full answer. H plus e equals sign 180. You could also do it, let me do a separate example if you do something a little bit different. Let's say instead of doing h and e, let's say we did b and f. If we did b and f, then what would we do? We would look at b, we would look at f, and those two actually look like they're equivalent, like they're the same angle. They're both acute. So our equation would be b is equal to f. Why? Because b and f are alternate interior angles. B and f are alternate interior angles, and therefore they have to be congruent. Since B and F are congruent, they got the same measure, same number of degrees. Every time you're writing one of these equations for these type of parallel lines cut by a transversal. You got two parallel lines, you got a transversal, then you got only two possible equations. It's either something equals something, so like B equals F, so like blank equals blank, or it's blank plus blank equals 180. That means they're either congruent, or in this case, they might be supplementary. That would be, for example, H and E. H and E. And those are your two possibilities for equations. They're either congruent, which means they are equal, or supplementary, which means they add up to 180 degrees. All right, let's look at something else. We're going to look at some parallel lines cut by a transversal. What is the angle pair called? What's the relationship? And what is the value of one of the angles? I'm going to show you how to set these equations up and how to solve them. So we'll do 1 here and 1 here. Questions 1 and 3. Actually, I'll do 5. But anyway. We'll do 3 and 5. Figures not drawn to scale. What is the angle pair called? These are same side exterior angles, same side exterior angles. So that would be your answer for this one. You would put these as, you would select same side exterior. What is the relationship between the angles? Well, same side exterior angles are always supplementary, meaning they add up to 180. Then they ask you for the value of x and to round to the nearest tenth if need be. Well, how do we find it? The equation setup is actually very, very simple. Remember we had in the last one, blank plus blank equals 180? Let's just put that together. It's 3x minus 5 plus 5x minus 7. I'm just taking this and this, and they add up to, when I add them together, I get what? 180, because I know these are supplementary. Now I just have to solve this equation. Got to go back to our old algebra skills from last year. This is the point of practicing that. 3x and 5x, we're going to combine our like terms. 3x plus 5x equals 8x. Negative 5 and negative 7 add together to give negative 12 equals 180. Then to solve this, see if you remember what to do, see if you can pause it and solve it yourself. What you're supposed to do, once you have that equation, is add 12 on both sides. Once you do that, you'll get 8x by itself, because these will cancel, equals 192. Next, I will divide both sides by 8 in order to inverse operation that multiplication. Cancel out the 8s, and you'll get x is equal to 192 divided by 8. What is that? I'm going to try and do that in my head. 20, 32, 24? I believe it's 24. I'll double check that. 20 times 8 is 160. 8 is 32. Yeah, so x is going to be 24. In this case, we don't have to round at all. It's just a whole number as our result. So what was the process here? It was set up an equation and then solve the equation. So when you have two supplementary ones, you need to do one plus the other and set it equal to 180 degrees. Once you solve the equation, you have found x. All right. Let's look then at a second example, because it's not always the exact same thing as those. Let's say it's question 4. What is the angle pair called? These are corresponding angles, so we can go through these one by one. The answer for this is corresponding. What is the relationship between them? Corresponding angles are always congruent. Remember, supplementary and congruent are the only two options for when you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. What is the value of one of the angles? Notice they didn't ask for the value of x. They asked for one of the angles. So this is going to change our answer at the end a little bit. Well, how do we figure it out? Well, I could do the blank plus blank equals 180, but that doesn't make any sense in this case because these are supposed to be congruent. They're the same. So 2x minus 5 equals 4x minus 15. They're the same thing. This one is equal to this one. So even a less complicated equation, the solution might be a little bit harder sometimes, but let's do our like terms. Let's get all the x's on one side. So I'll subtract 2x from both sides. I always like to subtract the smaller one, though you don't necessarily need to do the smaller one, but that's my preference. 4x minus 2x is just 2x, because 4 minus 2 is 2. Minus 15 equals negative 5. Then I'm going to move my constants to the other side. So I'm going to add 15 to both sides. Negative 5 plus 15 is 10. So we get 10 is equal to 2x. If 10 is equal to 2x, then I will divide both sides by 2. Divide by 2 on both sides, and I get x equals 5. Now don't be afraid to get a decimal answer on these. It is perfectly okay for x to be a decimal. I didn't get it in these examples, but it is perfectly okay for x to be a decimal. X may be decimal. That's okay. X might be a decimal. That is perfectly fine. Don't be scared of decimals. You can just use a calculator for them. You can do whatever you work with them. Decimals are fine. What is the value of one of the angles? Now here's where it's a little tricky. We know x. How does that actually help us find the angle? Well, if we go back in here, we know that x can help us figure out this angle? Well, x is 5. So this is 2 times 5. So this is 2 times 5 minus 5. In other words, it's 2 times 5 is 10 minus 5, or just 5. In this case, we actually ended up, funny enough, with the same thing as x, but that's not always going to be the case. I want to be clear. So sometimes it's going to be 5, sometimes it's going to be something else. Let's say this had been 3x plus 11. Then we would have just plugged 5 in for x, and we would have gotten 15 plus 11. So 15 plus 11. And that would have given us 26. And that would have been the value for one of the angles. We just plug it back in to figure out what the original angle was.